The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the general store, and Rose Jennings pressed her gloved hand against the dusty window, staring out at what would now be her home. Though calling Vulture City, Arizona, a home felt like calling a dying cactus a garden. The year was 1882, and the summer heat shimmered off the sand-swept streets like liquid glass, distorting the wooden buildings into wavering mirages. She had traveled from Boston with nothing but the dress on her back, a small carpet bag containing a spare change of clothes, and a heart full of desperate hope that this arrangement would work out better than the life she was leaving behind. The driver opened the door, and Rose stepped down onto the packed earth, her boots sinking slightly into the fine desert dust. The town sprawled before her like something from a fever dream, all weathered wood and sun-bleached signs. Saloons outnumbered respectable establishments 3-1, and the few women she could see on the street moved quickly, eyes down, as if the very air might burn them if they lingered too long in the open. "You the mail-order bride." A voice came from behind her, rough as sandpaper but not unkind. Rose turned and found herself looking up at the tallest man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to block out the sun. His face was weathered and tanned, lines carved deep around his eyes from squinting against the desert glare. Dark hair fell to his collar beneath a battered hat, and his eyes were the color of strong coffee. He wore dusty work clothes and a gun belt that sat low on his hips, the holster tied down with a leather thong. This had to be Yates Dalton, the rancher who had sent for her through the matrimonial agency in Boston. "I am Rose Jennings," she said, lifting her chin despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "You must be Mr. Dalton." He studied her for a long moment, and she could feel his gaze taking in every detail. Her dress was threadbare at the cuffs and hem, mended in places where the fabric had worn through. Her carpet bag was small enough to carry in one hand. She had no trunk, no hope chest, none of the things a proper bride should bring to a marriage. She had written as much in her letters, but seeing his expression now, she wondered if he had truly believed her when she said she came with nothing. "That is all you brought?" he asked, nodding toward the carpet bag. Rose felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. "I told you in my letters that I had nothing to bring. I am sorry if you expected more, but I was honest about my circumstances." She waited for the disappointment, the anger, perhaps even the rejection. The agency had warned her that some men changed their minds when they saw how little their brides actually possessed. She braced herself to be sent back to Boston on the next stage, back to the boarding house where she worked 16 hours a day for barely enough to cover her room and meals, back to fending off the advances of the owner's son who seemed to think a poor working girl had no right to refuse him. But Yates Dalton did not look angry. Instead, something shifted in his expression, softening the hard lines around his mouth. He reached out and took the carpet bag from her hand, his fingers brushing hers for just a moment. "You brought yourself and you brought hope. That is all we need to start." The words settled over Rose like a warm blanket on a cold night. She had expected many things from this arrangement, but kindness had not been among them. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, and she blinked them back rapidly. She would not cry on the street like some helpless child. She had come here to build a new life, and she would do it with her head held high. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. "I promise I will work hard. I can cook and clean and sew. I will earn my keep." "You will be my wife, not a hired hand," Yates said firmly. "There is a difference." He gestured toward a wagon waiting nearby, hitched to 2 sturdy horses. "Come on. The ranch is about 5 miles out of town. We should get going before the heat gets any worse." He helped her up onto the wagon seat with a hand under her elbow, his touch respectful and brief. Then he climbed up beside her, settled the carpetbag at their feet, and took up the reins. The horses started forward at his command, their hooves kicking up small clouds of dust as they moved down the main street and out toward the open desert beyond. Rose had never seen landscape like this. In Boston, everything was green and growing, trees lining the streets and gardens tucked behind iron fences. Here, the earth stretched out in shades of brown and red and gold, dotted with strange plants that seemed more suited to the surface of the moon than any place on Earth. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels with their arms raised to the sky, and scrubby bushes clung to life in the sandy soil. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and blue against the cloudless sky. "It takes some getting used to," Yates said, following her gaze. "The desert, I mean. Most folks from back east find it harsh at first, but it has its own kind of beauty once you learn to see it." "It is very different," Rose admitted, "but I did not come here expecting everything to be the same as Boston. I came here for a fresh start." "What were you running from?" The question was direct but not accusatory. Rose considered how much to tell him. They were going to be married, after all. He had a right to know something of her past. "My parents died when I was 17. Cholera. I had no family left, no inheritance, nothing but the clothes I was wearing when the sickness took them. I found work at a boarding house, but the owner's son would not leave me alone. He thought because I was poor and alone, I had no right to refuse his attentions. When I complained to his father, I was told I should be grateful for the interest of a respectable man. So I started looking for a way out, and the matrimonial agency seemed like the best option." Yates was quiet for a moment, his jaw working as if he was chewing on something tough. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and hard. "Any man who thinks a woman cannot refuse him is not respectable, no matter what his circumstances. You were right to leave." "Thank you for saying so," Rose said softly. "Not everyone saw it that way. The other girls at the boarding house thought I was foolish to turn down a good match. They said I was too particular, that I should take what I could get while I was still young enough to attract any interest at all. You are better off out here than with some bastard who does not understand what the word no means," Yates said flatly. Then he glanced at her, and something like embarrassment crossed his face. "Pardon my language." Rose surprised herself by smiling. "I have heard worse working in a boarding house. You do not need to watch your words around me." The tension between them eased slightly, and they rode in companionable silence for a while. The sun beat down relentlessly, and Rose could feel sweat trickling down her back beneath her heavy Boston dress. She had not thought to bring lighter clothing, had not even known such things existed. Everything she owned was designed for the moderate climate of Massachusetts, utterly unsuitable for the furnace heat of an Arizona summer. "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked, wanting to know more about the man she was going to marry. "Going on 8 years now," Yates said. "I came out west after the war, looking for a place to start over. Worked as a ranch hand for a few years, saved every penny I could, and finally bought my own spread. It is not much, just a few hundred acres and a small herd, but it is mine. I have been building it up slowly, adding more cattle each year, improving the buildings. It is hard work, but honest work." "Were you in the war?" Rose asked quietly. His expression darkened, and she immediately regretted the question. But after a moment he nodded. "Union Army. I was at Gettysburg, among other places. I do not talk about it much. Some things are better left in the past." "I understand," Rose said, and she did. Everyone carried scars, some visible and some hidden deep inside. She had her own wounds that she preferred not to examine too closely. The ranch came into view as they crested a low rise. It was modest, as Yates had said, but there was something appealing about the simple buildings clustered together in the vast emptiness of the desert. A main house stood at the center, built of adobe with a wooden porch running along the front. Several outbuildings surrounded it, including a barn, a bunkhouse, and what looked like a chicken coop. A windmill turned slowly in the breeze, pumping water up from deep underground. Cottonwood trees grew near the house, their leaves providing precious shade. "It is nice," Rose said, and meant it. The place had a solid, established feel to it, as if it had put down roots and intended to stay. "The house is not fancy," Yates warned as he pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the porch. "I have been living alone here for years, and I never saw much point in making things pretty. But it is sturdy and the roof does not leak." He helped her down from the wagon and carried her carpet bag to the front door. The interior of the house was dim and cool after the blazing heat outside. Rose's eyes took a moment to adjust, and then she looked around what was going to be her new home. The main room served as both kitchen and living space. A cast iron stove stood against one wall, with a rough wooden table and chairs nearby. A few shelves held dishes and supplies. A door led to what she assumed was the bedroom, and another door opened onto what looked like a storage room. Everything was clean but Spartan, with none of the small touches that made a house feel like a home. No curtains hung at the windows, no rugs covered the wooden floor, no pictures adorned the walls. "I told you it was not fancy," Yates said, watching her take it all in. "But you can make any changes you like. If you want curtains or anything else, we can get supplies in town." "It is fine," Rose said quickly. "Truly. It just needs a woman's touch, that is all. Give me a few weeks and I will have it feeling like a proper home." Something in his expression shifted, a flash of loneliness that made her heart ache. How long had he been out here alone, working this land without anyone to share it with? She understood that feeling all too well, the sense of being utterly alone in the world with no one who truly cared whether you lived or died. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "I have some cold beef and bread. It is not much, but it will hold you over until supper." "That sounds wonderful," Rose said, realizing she was actually starving. She had been too nervous to eat much during the journey, and now that she was finally here, her body was demanding food. Yates set out the simple meal and they ate together at the wooden table. The beef was tough and the bread was dry, but Rose had eaten worse. As they ate, Yates told her more about the ranch and his plans for it. He wanted to expand the herd, build better water infrastructure, maybe even plant some crops if he could get irrigation working. He spoke with quiet passion about the land and what it could become with enough work and patience. "I should warn you," he said after a while. "I have 2 men who work for me. They live in the bunkhouse and take their meals there, but you will see them around. One is called Charlie Martinez. He has been with me since the beginning. Good man, knows cattle better than anyone I have ever met. The other is a younger fellow named Tom Pierce. He has only been here about 6 months, but he is a hard worker and learning fast. They are both decent men, and they will treat you with respect or answer to me." "I appreciate you telling me," Rose said. She had worried about being the only woman on a ranch full of men, but Yates's tone made it clear he would not tolerate any disrespect toward her. "There is one other thing we should discuss," Yates said, and suddenly he looked uncomfortable. He stared down at his plate, not meeting her eyes. "About the marriage. I know you came here expecting we would get married right away, and we will. The circuit preacher comes through about once a month, and he should be back in Vulture City in about 2 weeks. But until then, you will have the bedroom and I will sleep out in the barn. I will not have anyone saying I took advantage of you before we were properly wed." Rose felt a wave of relief so strong it nearly made her dizzy. She had been dreading this conversation, unsure how to tell this man she barely knew that she needed time before they became husband and wife in truth. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I was hoping you would understand. I want to do this properly." "So do I," Yates said, finally meeting her eyes. "I did not send for a wife just to have someone warming my bed. I want a partner, someone to build a life with. That takes time and trust, and we have not had a chance to build either yet." They finished their meal in comfortable silence, and then Yates showed her around the rest of the house. The bedroom was small but adequate, with a sturdy bed covered in plain blankets, a dresser with a cracked mirror, and a trunk at the foot of the bed. A window looked out over the desert, and Rose could see the sun beginning its slow descent toward the horizon. "I will leave you to settle in," Yates said from the doorway. "I need to check on the herd and talk to the men. Make yourself at home. Everything here is yours now, too." After he left, Rose unpacked her meager belongings and explored the house more thoroughly. She found the storage room stocked with flour, beans, coffee, salt pork, and other staples. There was a pump in the kitchen that brought up cool well water. The stove looked like it would heat the house adequately in winter, though she suspected the summers here made heat the last thing anyone worried about. As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple, Rose stood on the porch and watched the land transform. The harsh glare softened into something almost magical, shadows lengthening across the sand and the mountains glowing like they had been set on fire. Yates had been right about the desert having its own kind of beauty. You just had to learn how to see it. She heard footsteps and turned to see Yates approaching from the barn. He had washed up, his hair still damp and his face clean of trail dust. He looked younger like this, and Rose realized he was probably not much older than 30, maybe 32 at most. "I thought I would make some supper," he said. "Nothing fancy, just beans and bacon. Unless you are too tired from traveling, I can cook," Rose offered. "You must have had a long day too." "How about we cook together?" Yates suggested. "That way you can see where everything is and how the stove works. It can be temperamental sometimes." They worked side by side in the small kitchen, and Rose found herself relaxing into the simple domesticity of it. Yates was easy to work with, anticipating what she needed and moving out of her way when necessary. They talked about small things, nothing important, just the kind of conversation that helped two strangers become familiar with each other. The beans were hearty and filling, flavored with bacon and a touch of molasses Yates produced from the storage room. They ate on the porch as the stars began to emerge overhead, more stars than Rose had ever seen in her life. In Boston, the city lights washed out all but the brightest celestial objects. Here, the sky was a river of light, the Milky Way stretching from horizon to horizon. "I've never seen so many stars," Rose breathed, tilting her head back to take it all in. "Wait until winter," Yates said. "The sky gets even clearer when the air is cold. You can see things out here that most people never even know exist." They sat together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the desert night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and others answered. The wind whispered through the cottonwood trees and the windmill creaked as it turned. Rose felt something she had not felt in a very long time: peace. "I am glad I came here," she said softly. "I was so frightened on the journey, wondering if I was making a terrible mistake. But now that I am here, it feels right somehow." "I am glad you came too," Yates said, and the sincerity in his voice made her heart flutter. "I have been alone out here for a long time. It will be good to have someone to share it with." That night, Rose lay in the unfamiliar bed and listened to the sounds of her new home. She thought about Yates sleeping out in the barn when he had every right to demand she share this bed with him. She thought about the way he had looked at her carpet bag and said hope was all they needed to start. She thought about the future stretching out before her, full of possibility instead of dread. For the first time since her parents died, Rose allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. The next few days fell into a pattern that felt both strange and comfortable. Rose woke early and made breakfast, learning the quirks of the temperamental stove and figuring out how to make decent coffee from the supplies on hand. Yates came in from the barn to eat with her, and they talked about their plans for the day. Then he went out to work the ranch while Rose tackled the house. There was more work than she had anticipated. Years of bachelor living had left the place serviceable but grimy. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, beat dust out of the blankets, and organized the chaotic storage room. She found fabric in one of the trunks and fashioned simple curtains for the windows. She picked wildflowers from near the creek that ran behind the property and put them in a jar on the table. Yates noticed every change. He commented on the curtains, admired the flowers, thanked her for making the place feel more like a home. His appreciation was genuine and unstinting, and Rose found herself working even harder to please him. On the third day, Yates introduced her to Charlie Martinez and Tom Pierce. Charlie was a man in his 40s with a weathered face and kind eyes. He removed his hat when he met Rose and spoke to her with old-fashioned courtesy. Tom was younger, maybe 25, with sandy hair and a quick smile. Both men were clearly surprised to find their boss had acquired a wife, but they were welcoming and respectful. "It is about time boss found himself a good woman," Charlie said, his accent flavored with Spanish. "A man should not live alone like a hermit. It is not natural." "Charlie has been trying to marry me off for years," Yates said dryly. "He thinks every single woman between 18 and 50 is a potential wife." "I think you should not be alone," Charlie corrected. "There is a difference, and now you have found a lovely lady, so I am happy for you both." Rose liked Charlie immediately. Tom was more reserved, but he seemed like a good sort, the kind of young man who worked hard and did not cause trouble. Knowing these men would be around made her feel more secure somehow, as if the ranch was a real community instead of just an isolated homestead in the middle of nowhere. A week after her arrival, Yates took Rose into Vulture City to buy supplies and introduce her to the townspeople. The trip gave her a chance to see more of the area and get a sense of what kind of community she had joined. Vulture City was a mining town that had seen better days. Gold had been discovered nearby in the 1860s, and the town had boomed. But the easy gold was long gone, and now the place had settled into a sleepy existence sustained by ranching and the occasional hopeful prospector. The general store was run by a woman named Margaret Hoffman, a formidable German immigrant with steel-gray hair and sharp blue eyes. She looked Rose up and down with an assessing gaze that missed nothing. "So you are the mail-order bride," Margaret said bluntly. "Welcome to Vulture City. I hope you know what you are getting into, marrying a stubborn man like Yates Dalton." "I heard that, Margaret," Yates called from where he was examining harness leather. "I meant for you to hear it," Margaret shot back, but there was affection in her voice. She turned back to Rose. "He is a good man, though. Works hard, pays his debts, treats people fair. You could do worse." "I am beginning to realize that," Rose said, surprised by how much she meant it. Margaret's expression softened slightly. "You need anything, you come to me. I have been in this territory for 20 years and I have seen just about everything. I can tell you which plants are safe to eat, how to treat a rattlesnake bite, and where to buy decent fabric for dresses. You look like you could use some lighter clothing. That Boston wool is going to kill you come July." Rose looked down at her heavy dress and had to agree. I do not have much money for new clothes. I have some cotton fabric that has been sitting on the shelf for 6 months, Margaret said. No one around here sews much, so it is not moving. I will give you a good price and you can pay it off over time. Yates is good for it. They spent the next hour selecting fabric, thread, and other supplies Rose would need to make herself some lighter dresses. Margaret threw in a packet of garden seeds as well. You have that creek behind your place, she said. You can grow vegetables if you are willing to haul water. Fresh greens will do you good. Men never think about such things, but a body needs more than just meat and beans. By the time they loaded the wagon and headed back to the ranch, Rose felt like she was starting to belong. People had greeted her on the street, welcomed her to town, offered advice and assistance. It was not the anonymous bustle of Boston where you could live for years without knowing your neighbors' names. Here, everyone knew everyone else, and they looked out for each other because that was what you did in a harsh land where survival often depended on cooperation. Margaret likes you, Yates said as they rode back toward the ranch. That is a good sign. She is the unofficial mayor of Vulture City. If she approves of you, everyone else will follow. She seems very capable, Rose said diplomatically. Yates laughed, a deep rumbling sound that Rose was beginning to recognize. That is one word for it. Margaret came out here with her husband back in the boom days. He died in a mine collapse 10 years ago, and everyone expected her to pack up and go back east. Instead, she bought the general store and has been running it ever since. She is tougher than most of the men in this territory. I like her, Rose said firmly. She reminds me that women can be strong and independent even in difficult circumstances. You are already proving that yourself, Yates said quietly. Coming all the way out here with nothing but hope, ready to start a completely new life. That takes courage. Rose felt warmth spread through her chest at the compliment. Yates was not a man who spoke idly or offered false praise. When he said something, he meant it. That evening they sat on the porch again after supper, watching the sun set over the desert. It had become their habit, this quiet time together at the end of the day. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just sat in companionable silence, but Rose found herself looking forward to it more and more. The preacher should be in town this Sunday, Yates said after a while. I thought we could ride in for the service and get married afterward, if that suits you. Rose's heart skipped a beat. She had known this was coming, had agreed to it when she answered Yates's advertisement in the Matrimonial Gazette. But now that the moment was approaching, she felt a flutter of nervousness. That would be fine, she managed to say. Yates turned to look at her, his dark eyes serious in the fading light. Rose, I need you to know something. I am not expecting anything to change between us just because we sign a paper and say some vows. We will still take things at whatever pace feels right to you. This marriage is not about me getting what I want. It is about both of us building a partnership that works for both of us. Do you understand? Rose nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. How had she gotten so lucky as to find a man who actually cared about her feelings and comfort? I need to hear you say it, Yates pressed gently. I need to know you understand and agree. I understand, Rose said, finding her voice. And I agree. Thank you for being so patient with me. I know this arrangement must be frustrating for you. It is not frustrating, Yates said firmly. It is the right thing to do. I want you to want to be here, Rose. I want you to choose this life and choose me, not just go along with it because you feel obligated or trapped. That is important to me. I am beginning to choose it, Rose admitted. When I first arrived, I was just relieved to be away from Boston and safe from the boarding house owner's son. But now I am starting to see the life we could build here together, and I want that. I want to be your wife, Yates, not just on paper but truly. The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw. Yates reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "That is all I needed to hear," he said softly. They sat there holding hands until full dark, and when Rose finally went inside to her bedroom, she felt like something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer just two strangers thrown together by circumstance. They were becoming partners, building something real and lasting. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect Arizona morning that made you forget how brutally hot the afternoon would become. Rose dressed in her best dress, which was not saying much given the state of her wardrobe. She had stayed up late the night before sewing a new dress from the cotton fabric Margaret had sold her, but it was not quite finished yet. She would have to make do with her old Boston wool and hope she did not faint from heat before the ceremony was over. Yates emerged from the barn wearing clean clothes and a string tie, his hair neatly combed and his boots polished to a dull shine. He looked more formal than Rose had ever seen him, and strikingly handsome in a rugged, weathered way. "You look beautiful," he said when he saw her, and Rose felt her cheeks warm with pleasure. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." They rode into town together, the wagon seat feeling smaller somehow with both of them dressed up and heading toward their wedding. Charlie and Tom had elected to stay at the ranch, giving the newlyweds some privacy, though Charlie had clapped Yates on the shoulder and told him he was a lucky man. The church in Vulture City was a simple wooden structure with a cross mounted over the door and shutters that could be closed against dust storms. Inside, rough wooden pews faced a plain altar. The circuit preacher was a thin man in his 50s named Reverend Samuel Patterson. He had kind eyes and a gentle manner that immediately put Rose at ease. "I understand you two want to be married today," Reverend Patterson said after the service, which had been attended by about 20 townspeople. "Have you known each other long?" "We met through the matrimonial service," Yates explained. "Rose arrived from Boston just over a week ago, but I know my own mind and I want to marry her. And you, Miss Jennings, you are willing to enter into this marriage." The Reverend looked at Rose with concern, clearly worried she was being pressured. "I am willing," Rose said firmly. "More than willing. I came here specifically to marry Mr. Dalton, and I am ready to become his wife." Satisfied, Reverend Patterson gathered a few townspeople to serve as witnesses. Margaret Hoffman was there, along with the blacksmith and the doctor. They stood in the simple church while the Reverend opened his Bible and began to read the familiar words of the marriage ceremony. Rose listened to Yates repeat his vows, his deep voice steady and sure. When it was her turn, she spoke clearly, meaning every word. This was not just a practical arrangement anymore. This was a choice she was making with her whole heart. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Patterson said with a smile. "You may kiss your bride." Yates looked at Rose, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, giving permission. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a brief, chaste kiss that still managed to make her heart race. When he pulled back, he was smiling, and Rose found herself smiling too. They were married. Margaret insisted on hosting a small celebration at the general store, bringing out cake she had baked that morning and bottles of sarsaparilla. More townspeople drifted over, offering congratulations and advice. Rose was overwhelmed by the warmth of the community, these people who barely knew her but were willing to welcome her as one of their own. "You take care of our Rose now," Margaret told Yates sternly. "She is one of us now, and we look after our own." "I will," Yates promised. "You have my word on that." The sun was setting by the time they finally headed back to the ranch. Rose sat close to Yates on the wagon seat, acutely aware that everything had changed between them. They were married now, husband and wife, bound together by law and by vows spoken before God and witnesses. "Are you all right?" Yates asked as they approached the ranch. "I am nervous," Rose admitted. "But in a good way, I think." "Me too," Yates said, and the admission made Rose feel better. At least she was not alone in her anxiety. Back at the ranch, Yates helped her down from the wagon and then stood there looking uncertain for the first time since Rose had met him. "I meant what I said before," he told her. "Nothing has to change tonight if you are not ready. I can still sleep in the barn." Rose took a deep breath and made a decision. "You do not have to sleep in the barn anymore, Yates. You are my husband now. I want you to come inside. I want us to start our marriage properly." Something blazed in his eyes, hot and fierce, but he kept his voice gentle when he spoke. "Are you sure? I do not want you to feel pressured." "I am sure," Rose said, and she was. She had spent the past week and a half getting to know this man, watching how he treated his animals and his workers, seeing his kindness and patience. She trusted him in a way she had not trusted anyone in years. "I want this, Yates. I want to be your wife in every way." He took her hand and led her inside the house that was now truly their home. The bedroom looked the same as it had every other night, but everything felt different now. Rose's hands trembled slightly as she unpinned her hair, letting it fall in dark waves around her shoulders. Yates watched her with hungry eyes, but he did not rush her, did not push for more than she was ready to give. When they finally came together, it was with tenderness and care. Yates was gentle, mindful of her inexperience, taking his time to make sure she was comfortable and ready. There was pain at first, but Rose had expected that. What she had not expected was the intimacy of it, the way it felt to be so close to another person, to trust someone enough to be vulnerable and open. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Rose's head on Yates's chest and his arm around her shoulders. She could hear his heartbeat beneath her ear, strong and steady. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his fingers stroking through her hair. "I am more than all right," Rose said honestly. "I am happy, Yates, truly happy. I did not think I would ever feel this way again." "Neither did I," he admitted. "I thought I would live out here alone until I died. But then I decided to take a chance and write to that matrimonial agency, and they sent me you. The best thing that ever happened to me." Rose tilted her head up to kiss him, pouring all her gratitude and growing affection into the gesture. She was starting to realize that what she felt for Yates was more than just gratitude or relief. She was falling in love with him, this quiet, steady man who had offered her hope when she had nothing else. The next weeks passed in a blur of work and growing intimacy. Rose finished her new dresses and discovered she was much more comfortable in lightweight cotton than heavy wool. She started a garden near the creek, hauling water in buckets every evening to keep the plants alive. Yates built her raised beds to make the work easier and helped her construct a simple irrigation system using pipes and a hand pump. The vegetables thrived in the rich soil near the water, and soon Rose had lettuce, tomatoes, and beans growing in neat rows. She felt a surge of pride every time she looked at her garden, this green oasis she had created in the middle of the desert. Charlie and Tom quickly accepted Rose as part of the ranch. They started taking their noon meal at the main house, and Rose enjoyed cooking for a larger group. The men were appreciative of her efforts, praising everything she made even when she knew it was nothing special. They treated her with respect and courtesy, and in return, she mended their clothes and made sure they always had fresh bread and decent coffee. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Rose woke early to make breakfast and pack lunches for Yates and the men. She spent her days cooking, cleaning, tending the garden, and slowly improving their home. She made new curtains for every window, hooked a rag rug for the bedroom floor, and convinced Yates to let her whitewash the interior walls to brighten up the rooms. In the evenings, after supper, she and Yates would sit on the porch and talk about their days. Sometimes Yates would tell her stories about his past, carefully edited tales that avoided the worst of his war experiences, but gave her a sense of the man he had been before he came west. Sometimes Rose would tell him about growing up in Boston, about her parents and the happy childhood that had been cut short by disease. At night, they came together in their bed, and Rose marveled at how quickly physical intimacy had become natural and comfortable between them. Yates was an attentive lover, always making sure she found pleasure in their coupling. Rose had not known it could be like this combination of physical satisfaction and emotional connection. One evening about 6 weeks after Rose's arrival, as they sat watching the sunset, Yates turned to her with a serious expression. "Rose, I need to tell you something. I have been putting this off because I did not want to worry you, but you deserve to know." Rose felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach. "What is it?" "There have been some problems with cattle rustlers in the area," Yates said carefully. "Nothing close to here yet, but a few ranches to the south have lost stock. The sheriff thinks it is a gang working their way north. I do not want to frighten you, but I need you to be aware and cautious. Do not go far from the house alone, and if you see anyone you do not recognize, come find me or one of the men immediately." "I understand," Rose said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Do you think they will come here?" "I do not know," Yates admitted. "Our herd is small enough that we might not be worth the risk, but I am not taking any chances. I have asked Charlie and Tom to keep their rifles close, and I want you to learn to shoot." "Shoot," Rose repeated, startled. She had never touched a gun in her life. "Just for protection," Yates said. "I am not expecting you to fight off a gang of rustlers single-handed, but if someone comes around when I am out on the range, I want you to be able to defend yourself. Will you let me teach you?" Rose nodded slowly. The thought of learning to use a gun made her nervous, but she trusted Yates's judgment. If he thought it was necessary, then she would learn. The next day, Yates set up targets behind the barn and brought out an old revolver. "This is a Colt .45, he explained, showing her how to load and unload it safely. "It has a kick to it, so be prepared. Hold it with both hands like this and squeeze the trigger gently. Do not jerk it." Rose's first few shots went wildly off target, and the recoil nearly knocked her backward. But Yates was patient, correcting her stance and grip, encouraging her to keep trying. By the end of the afternoon, she was hitting the targets more often than not, and Yates declared himself satisfied with her progress. "You are a natural," he said, and Rose glowed with pride at the compliment. "I hope I never have to use it," she said as they walked back to the house. "So do I," Yates agreed, "but it is better to know how and not need it than to need it and not know how." 2 weeks later, Rose was in the garden when she heard the sound of horses approaching. She straightened up, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw 3 riders coming toward the house. They were strangers, rough-looking men with hard faces and guns on their hips. Rose felt her heart begin to pound. She dropped her watering bucket and ran for the house, where Yates had left the loaded revolver in easy reach. By the time she got inside, the riders had reached the porch. She watched through the window as they dismounted, and one of them pounded on the door. "Anyone home?" A rough voice called. Rose stood frozen, the gun heavy in her hands. Where was Yates? He had ridden out to check on the herd that morning with Charlie and Tom. She was alone, and these men looked dangerous. "We know someone is here," the voice continued. "Saw you in the garden. Come on out. We just want to talk." Rose took a deep breath and made a decision. She opened the door but stayed inside, the gun held low but ready. "My husband is not here right now. You will have to come back later." The three men exchanged glances, and Rose saw calculation in their eyes. The one who had been doing the talking stepped forward. He was a big man with a scarred face and tobacco-stained teeth. "That is all right. Maybe you can help us. We are looking for work. Heard there might be ranches around here that need extra hands." Rose did not believe him for a second. These men were not looking for honest work. "We are not hiring right now," she said firmly. "You should try one of the bigger spreads to the east." "That is not very neighborly," the man said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "We have been riding for days. Could we at least get some water for our horses?" Rose hesitated. Refusing water in the desert could be a death sentence, but she did not want these men on her property any longer than necessary. "The well is over there," she said, pointing. "Help yourselves and then move along." The men watered their horses, but they took their time about it, looking around the ranch with obvious interest. Rose kept the gun ready, watching them through the window. Finally, they mounted up again. "Tell your husband we stopped by," the scarred man called as they rode off. "We might come back this way again." Rose watched until they were out of sight, then sank onto a chair, her legs trembling. She was still sitting there when Yates, Charlie, and Tom rode in an hour later. She ran out to meet them, and Yates took one look at her face and jumped down from his horse. "What happened?" he demanded, his hands on her shoulders. Rose told him about the three men, describing them as best she could. Yates's expression grew darker with every word. "That sounds like the Brennan gang," Charlie said grimly. "They have been hitting ranches all over the territory. If they were here scouting, they might be planning to come back." "Then we need to be ready," Yates said. "Rose, you did exactly right. You stayed inside and kept them at a distance. I am proud of you." "I was terrified," Rose admitted. "Fear is not a bad thing," Yates said. "Fear keeps you alert and cautious. But you did not let it paralyze you, and that is what matters." That night, Yates moved a loaded rifle to the bedroom and made sure all the doors and windows had sturdy locks. He and the men worked out a schedule so that someone was always near the house during the day. Rose hated that her peaceful life had been disrupted by the threat of violence, but she understood the necessity of the precautions. A week passed with no sign of the rustlers. Then another week. Rose began to hope they had moved on to easier targets, but Yates remained vigilant and his caution proved justified. It was just before dawn when Rose woke to the sound of gunshots. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding, and reached for Yates, but his side of the bed was empty. Then she heard his voice from outside, shouting orders to Charlie and Tom. Rose grabbed her robe and the revolver and ran to the window. In the gray pre-dawn light, she could see shadowy figures near the barn. More gunshots rang out, and she saw muzzle flashes in the darkness. The rustlers had come back, and they were trying to steal the cattle. Yates and his men were pinned down behind various pieces of cover, exchanging fire with the rustlers. Rose counted at least 5 attackers, maybe more. The odds were not good. She made a quick decision. Running to the kitchen, she found matches and the kerosene lamp. She lit several strips of cloth soaked in kerosene and threw them out the window toward the rustlers, creating sudden flares of light that illuminated their positions. Then she fired the revolver through the window, not really aiming to hit anyone but hoping to add to the confusion and make the rustlers think there were more defenders than they had expected. Her strategy worked. The rustlers, suddenly lit up and taking fire from an unexpected direction, broke and ran for their horses. Yates and the men pursued them to the edge of the property, firing shots over their heads to speed them on their way. By the time full dawn broke, the danger was over. The rustlers were gone, disappearing into the desert. Yates came back to the house and found Rose still standing at the window with the gun in her hand, shaking with adrenaline. "You did good," he said, pulling her into his arms. "That trick with the lights was clever. It gave us the advantage we needed." "I was so frightened," Rose whispered against his chest. "I thought they might kill you." "Takes more than a few two-bit rustlers to kill me," Yates said, trying for a light tone. But Rose could feel the tension in his body, the way his hands trembled slightly as he held her. He had been frightened too, though he would never admit it. Charlie and Tom checked the property and confirmed that no cattle had been taken and no one had been seriously hurt. One of the rustlers had dropped a hat in his flight, and Charlie recognized it as belonging to one of the Brennan gang members. "We should report this to the sheriff," Yates said. "Maybe if enough ranchers stand together, we can run these bastards out of the territory for good." They rode into Vulture City later that morning and filed a report with Sheriff Wade Turner, a lean man in his 50s who had been keeping the peace in this part of Arizona for decades. He listened to their story and nodded grimly. "The Brennan gang has been getting bolder," he said. "But attacking a ranch with people in residence crosses a line. I will put together a posse and see if we can track them down. In the meantime, you folks stay alert. They might come back, though I doubt it after the reception you gave them." Word of the attempted raid spread quickly through Vulture City. Several neighboring ranchers stopped by the Dalton place over the next few days to offer support and share information. It turned out the Brennan gang had hit 3 other ranches in the past month, successfully stealing cattle from 2 of them. Only the Dalton ranch had managed to fight them off. "That is because of Rose," Yates told them. "She is the one who lit them up and gave us a clear shot. Bravest thing I have ever seen." Rose felt her cheeks warm at the praise, but she was secretly pleased. She had proven she could hold her own in this harsh land, that she was not just some helpless Eastern girl who needed constant protection. The sheriff's posse tracked the Brennan gang to a hideout in the hills and arrested 3 of them after a brief shootout. The rest scattered, and while they were still at large, the immediate threat seemed to have passed. Life on the Dalton ranch gradually returned to normal. As summer faded into autumn, Rose realized she had been in Arizona for nearly 4 months. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had stepped off the stagecoach in Vulture City, frightened and uncertain about her future. Now she could not imagine being anywhere else. She had fallen deeply in love with Yates, though she had not yet said the words aloud. She showed her love in actions, cooking his favorite meals, mending his clothes, greeting him with a kiss when he came in from the range. And Yates showed his love the same way, with thoughtful gestures and quiet consideration. He brought her wildflowers from his rides, built her a better workspace in the kitchen, sat with her in the evenings and listened when she talked about her day. One cool October evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Rose finally found the courage to say what had been in her heart for weeks. "Yates, I need to tell you something," she said softly. He turned to look at her, concern in his eyes. "What is it?" "I love you," Rose said simply. "I know we started this as a practical arrangement, a marriage of convenience, but somewhere along the way I fell in love with you. I needed you to know that." Yates was quiet for a long moment, and Rose felt her heart sink. Had she made a mistake by speaking up? But then he reached over and took her hand, his grip warm and strong. "I have been in love with you since the day you stepped off that stagecoach," he said roughly. "You stood there in your worn-out dress with your tiny carpetbag, and you looked at this town like you were ready to fight the whole desert if you had to. I knew right then that you were special, and every day since has just proven it. I love you, Rose, more than I thought I could ever love anyone." Rose felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. She leaned over and kissed him, putting all her emotion into the gesture. When they finally pulled apart, they were both smiling. "I guess we did all right for a couple of strangers who met through the mail," Yates said with a grin. "I guess we did," Rose agreed. That winter was cold but not unbearable. Rose had heard horror stories about Arizona summers, but no one had warned her about the winter nights when the temperature could drop below freezing. She and Yates spent those cold evenings huddled close to the fire, wrapped in blankets and each other's arms. Christmas came, and Rose made a special effort to create a festive atmosphere. She had never had much during the holidays in Boston, but here she wanted to make their first Christmas as a married couple memorable. She convinced Yates to cut down a small pine tree from the higher elevations, and she decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments she made herself. She baked cookies and a special cake, using precious sugar she had been hoarding for weeks. On Christmas morning, Yates presented her with a gift wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a beautiful shawl made from soft wool, dyed in shades of blue and green. "I had Margaret order it special from Santa Fe," he explained. "I noticed you were cold in the evenings." Rose was touched beyond words. She had not expected a gift, had not even thought about exchanging presents. She gave him the only thing she had, a new shirt she had sewn from fabric she had bought with money earned from selling vegetables to people in town. "It is perfect," Yates said, running his hands over the careful stitching. "You are so talented, Rose. I am a lucky man." They invited Charlie and Tom to share Christmas dinner, a feast of roasted chicken, potatoes from the garden, and all the trimmings Rose could manage with their limited supplies. It was a simple celebration, but it felt right, this gathering of their small ranch family. As winter gave way to spring, Rose began to suspect she might be pregnant. Her monthly courses stopped, and she felt nauseated in the mornings. She said nothing to Yates at first, wanting to be sure before she raised his hopes. But as the weeks passed and the signs became more obvious, she could not keep the secret any longer. She told him one evening as they were getting ready for bed, "Yates, I think I am going to have a baby." He froze in the act of removing his boots, then slowly stood up and crossed to where she sat on the edge of the bed. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there." Yates dropped to his knees in front of her and took her hands in his. "How do you feel about it?" "Terrified," Rose admitted, "but also happy. I want your children, Yates. I want to fill this house with a family." "We will get through this together," Yates promised. "I am going to take such good care of you and our baby. You will want for nothing, I swear it." The next day they rode into town so Rose could see the doctor. Doc Harrison confirmed what Rose already knew. She was about 3 months along, and the baby should arrive sometime in late summer. He gave her advice on diet and rest, warned her about the dangers of working too hard in the heat, and promised to check on her regularly. Margaret was thrilled by the news. "Finally, a baby on the Dalton ranch," she declared. "This place needs the sound of children. I will start putting together some things you will need. You cannot raise a baby with nothing." True to her word, Margaret became a one-woman support system for Rose. She provided fabric for baby clothes, gave advice on what to expect during pregnancy and childbirth, and shared stories from her own experience raising children on the frontier. Rose was grateful for the older woman's knowledge and kindness. As Rose's pregnancy progressed, Yates became increasingly protective. He insisted she stop hauling water for the garden, so he built a better irrigation system to make the work easier. He would not let her lift anything heavy, and he fretted if she showed any sign of fatigue or discomfort. Rose found his concern both touching and occasionally frustrating, but she knew it came from love. The summer heat returned with a vengeance, and Rose found it much harder to tolerate in her pregnant state. She spent the hottest part of the day inside the adobe house, which stayed relatively cool thanks to the thick walls. She sewed tiny clothes for the baby, embroidering careful patterns on little gowns and blankets. She prepared the storage room to serve as a nursery, whitewashing the walls and making curtains for the small window. Yates built a cradle from smooth pine wood, sanding it carefully so there would be no splinters. He carved their initials into the headboard along with the year, YD and RD. 1883. Rose cried when she saw it, overwhelmed by the tangible evidence of the life they were creating together. In mid-August, on a day so hot the very air seemed to shimmer, Rose's pains began. Yates sent Tom racing to town to fetch Doc Harrison and Margaret while he stayed with Rose, holding her hand and trying to hide his own terror. "I am right here," he kept saying. "I am not going anywhere. You can do this, Rose. You are the strongest person I know." The labor was long and difficult, made worse by the oppressive heat. Rose lost track of time, aware only of the pain and Yates's steady presence beside her. Doc Harrison and Margaret arrived sometime in the afternoon and took over, sending Yates out of the room despite his protests. "This is woman's work," Margaret said firmly. "You will just be in the way. Go wait outside." Yates paced the porch like a caged animal while Charlie and Tom kept him company and tried to distract him with talk of ranch business. But every time Rose cried out, Yates flinched as if he had been struck. Finally, as the sun was setting and the heat was beginning to ease, a new sound joined Rose's labored breathing. The thin, angry wail of a newborn baby filled the house. Yates burst through the door before anyone could stop him. "Rose, is she all right?" "She is fine," Margaret said with a tired smile. "And so is your son. You have a healthy baby boy, Yates." Yates crossed to the bed where Rose lay exhausted but smiling, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. "A son," he breathed, staring down at the red-faced infant with wonder. "You want to hold him?" Rose asked. Yates took the baby with shaking hands, cradling him awkwardly against his chest. The baby stopped crying and looked up at his father with unfocused eyes. Something in Yates's expression cracked open, all his carefully maintained control dissolving as he looked at his son. "He is perfect," Yates said hoarsely. "You did so good, Rose. Thank you. Thank you for this gift." They named him James after Rose's father. Little James Dalton was a healthy baby with strong lungs and a voracious appetite. Rose fell into the exhausting routine of new motherhood, feeding him every few hours and snatching sleep whenever she could. Yates helped as much as he could, walking the floor with James when he was fussy, changing his nappies and doing extra housework so Rose could rest. Charlie and Tom were both delighted with the new addition to the ranch. They would stop by after work to admire the baby and offer to help with chores. "He's going to grow up to be a fine rancher," Charlie predicted. "Look at those strong hands." As the weeks passed, Rose began to feel more confident in her new role as a mother. James thrived under her care, growing bigger and stronger every day. Yates was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son. Rose would often find them together, Yates talking to the baby in a soft voice, telling him about the ranch and the desert and all the things they would do together when James was older. The year turned, and suddenly it was spring again. Rose had been at the ranch for over a year and a half now, and it felt like a lifetime. The frightened girl who had stepped off the stagecoach seemed like a different person entirely. Rose was a wife, a mother, a rancher's partner. She had learned to shoot, to garden in the desert, to make a home in this harsh and beautiful land. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching James play with a wooden toy Yates had carved for him, Rose reflected on how much her life had changed. "You ever regret answering my advertisement?" Yates asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Not for a single moment," Rose said honestly. "This is the life I was meant to live. I just did not know it until I got here." "I knew from the moment I saw you," Yates said. "You arrived with nothing but hope, and I told you that was all we needed to start. I was right. Look what we have built together." Rose looked around at their thriving ranch, at their healthy son, at the man she loved more than life itself. "We have built something wonderful," she agreed. "A home, a family, a future. Everything I ever dreamed of and more." As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Rose felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. She had come to Arizona with nothing but hope, and that hope had blossomed into a life richer than anything she could have imagined. The years that followed were filled with the kind of hard work and simple joys that made up a life on the frontier. The ranch prospered under Yates's careful management and Rose's domestic skills. They expanded the herd, improved the buildings, and even added a few more acres to their property. The vegetable garden grew larger each year, and Rose became known in Vulture City for the quality of her produce. James grew into a sturdy toddler and then a rambunctious little boy. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and he was fearless in the way only a child raised in the wilderness could be. By the time he was 3, he was following Yates around like a shadow, learning about cattle and horses and all the skills a rancher needed. When James was 4, Rose discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In the spring of 1887, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Yates's mother. Sarah was a calm baby, content to watch the world with solemn eyes, so different from her boisterous brother. The ranch felt complete now, filled with the sounds of children playing and the warmth of family life. Charlie and Tom remained loyal employees, though Tom eventually married a girl from town and moved into his own place. They hired another hand to replace him, a young man named David who was eager to learn the ranching business. Rose's days were full from dawn to dusk, caring for 2 small children, maintaining the household and helping with the endless work of the ranch. But she had never been happier. This was the life she had chosen, and every day she was grateful for the leap of faith she had taken when she answered Yates Dalton's advertisement in the Matrimonial Gazette. Margaret Hoffman became like a mother to Rose, and the older woman doted on James and Sarah as if they were her own grandchildren. She taught Rose more about surviving and thriving in Arizona, sharing knowledge accumulated over decades of frontier life. When Margaret's health began to fail, Rose visited her regularly, bringing the children and fresh vegetables from the garden. "You have done well for yourself, Rose," Margaret said one afternoon as they sat in her room above the general store. "When you first arrived here, I was not sure you would make it. You seemed so young and fragile, but you proved me wrong. You have strength I did not see at first, the kind of strength that matters out here." "You helped me find that strength," Rose said, squeezing the older woman's hand. "You and Yates both. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself." Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep that winter, and the whole town mourned her loss. Rose grieved for the woman who had been her mentor and friend, but she also felt grateful for the time they had shared. Margaret had taught her so much about what it meant to be a strong woman in a hard land. The children grew, and the ranch continued to prosper. James started helping with real ranch work when he was 7, learning to rope and ride under his father's patient instruction. Sarah was quieter than her brother, preferring to help Rose in the garden and the house, but she had her own kind of strength. She was the one who would sit for hours nursing an injured bird back to health, who would share her lunch with any stray dog that wandered onto the property. When Rose was 32 and Yates 35, they welcomed their third child, a boy they named Thomas, though everyone called him Tommy. He was the wildest of the three children, always getting into mischief and giving his parents gray hairs with his adventures. But he was also the most affectionate, quick with hugs and declarations of love. The ranch that had seemed so stark and lonely when Rose first arrived was now bursting with life. The adobe house had been expanded to accommodate the growing family, with additional rooms added and a proper sitting room where the family gathered in the evenings. Rose had made curtains for every window and hooked rugs for every floor. Pictures hung on the walls, showing the progression of their family over the years. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates took Rose into town for a special dinner at the hotel restaurant, leaving the children in Charlie's capable care for the evening. Over steak and potatoes, they reflected on the decade they had spent together. 10 years, Rose marveled. It seems impossible that so much time has passed. I still remember stepping off that stagecoach like it was yesterday. I remember it too, Yates said with a smile. You were wearing that heavy Boston dress, completely unsuitable for Arizona. You looked terrified but determined. I fell in love with you right then, though I did not know it at the time. I was terrified, Rose admitted. I had no idea what I was getting into. But you made me feel safe from the very beginning. Do you remember what you said when you saw my carpet bag, when you realized I really had come with nothing but hope? I said that was all we needed to start, Yates recalled. And I meant it. I did not need you to bring money or possessions. I just needed you to bring yourself and a willingness to build something together. And you did that, Rose. You brought so much more than hope. You brought love and strength and courage. You made a house into a home and a lonely man into a husband and father. You gave me everything that matters. Rose felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. You gave me the same things, she said softly. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. You saved me, Yates, from that life in Boston, from the hopelessness I felt. You showed me that I could be strong and capable, that I had value beyond just being young and passably pretty. You made me believe in myself. They held hands across the table, two people who had started as strangers and become everything to each other. Their love had grown slowly, built on a foundation of respect and partnership, and it had only deepened with time. They had weathered challenges together. The attempted cattle raid, difficult pregnancies, harsh weather, sick children, lean years when money was tight. But they had also shared countless joys, watching their children grow, celebrating small victories, building their ranch into something they could be proud of. To another 10 years, Yates said, raising his glass of cider. To another 50, Rose countered with a smile, touching her glass to his. They clinked glasses and drank, toasting the past and the future, all the years they would spend together building their life in the Arizona desert. The children grew older, and the ranch continued to thrive. James showed every sign of following in his father's footsteps, with a natural talent for working with cattle and horses. When he was 15, Yates began teaching him the business side of ranching, showing him how to manage accounts and negotiate sales. James soaked up the knowledge like desert sand soaking up rain, eager to prove himself capable of eventually running the ranch. Sarah developed an interest in teaching and announced when she was 14 that she wanted to go to normal school and become a teacher. Yates and Rose supported her ambition, proud that their daughter wanted to pursue education. They began saving money to send her to the teacher's college in Phoenix when she was old enough. Tommy remained the wild child, but as he grew older, his recklessness tempered into adventurousness. He talked endlessly about becoming an explorer or maybe a scout for the army. He wanted to see what lay beyond the familiar boundaries of their ranch and Vulture City. "You take after your mother," Yates told him one day. She was brave enough to travel halfway across the country to start a new life with a man she had never met. That is the same kind of adventurous spirit you have. Tommy looked at Rose with new respect. "Really, Ma? You came all the way from Boston by yourself?" "I did," Rose confirmed. "It was one of the scariest things I have ever done, but also one of the best decisions I ever made. Sometimes you have to be brave and take a chance on something new." As the children became more independent, Rose found herself with more time to pursue her own interests. She started a women's group in Vulture City, where the ranch wives and town women could gather to share skills, support each other, and advocate for improvements in the community. Under Rose's leadership, the group successfully petitioned for a real schoolhouse to be built, replacing the converted storage room that had served as the town's school for years. Rose also became known for her nursing skills. After helping several neighbors through illnesses and injuries, she began studying medical books that Doc Harrison lent her. She learned to set broken bones, treat infections, and assist with difficult childbirths. When Doc Harrison retired, he recommended Rose to take over some of his duties, especially helping the women and children of the area. Yates was proud of everything Rose accomplished, and he supported her work even when it took her away from the ranch for days at a time. "You have so much to offer," he told her. "I would never want to keep you from using your talents to help others." Their marriage had evolved over the years from the passionate intensity of newlyweds to something deeper and more enduring. They still loved each other fiercely, but their love was tested and proven, weathered by time and trials. They knew each other's faults and loved each other anyway. They could communicate with a glance, finish each other's sentences, and work together with the seamless coordination of a team that had been together for years. On Rose's 40th birthday, Yates gave her a journal bound in leather. "I want you to write down your story," he explained. "Tell about coming out west, building this ranch, raising our family. Someday our grandchildren will want to know how it all began, and I want them to hear it in your words." Rose was touched by the thoughtful gift. She began writing that very night, sitting at the kitchen table after everyone else had gone to bed, recording her memories of that frightening, hopeful journey from Boston to Arizona. She wrote about seeing the desert for the first time, about Yates taking her carpetbag and saying hope was all they needed to start. She wrote about falling in love, about the cattle raid, about giving birth to 3 children in this harsh and beautiful land. Writing her story helped Rose appreciate how far she had come. The frightened mail-order bride had transformed into a confident woman, secure in her identity and her place in the world. She was Yates Dalton's wife, mother to James, Sarah, and Tommy, respected member of the Vulture City community, healer and friend. She had built a life that mattered, one that would outlast her and continue to grow through her children and grandchildren. James married when he was 23, choosing a sensible girl from a neighboring ranch who shared his passion for cattle ranching. They built a small house on the Dalton property, and James began taking over more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Yates was happy to step back somewhat, though he still worked alongside his son most days. The arrival of James and his wife meant that soon there were grandchildren. First came a boy, then twin girls, and then another boy. Rose adored being a grandmother, delighting in spoiling the little ones and then sending them home to their parents when they got cranky. She taught the children the same skills her own mother had taught her, passing down recipes and stories and traditions. Sarah did go to normal school and became a teacher, just as she had dreamed. She taught in Vulture City for several years before marrying a banker from Phoenix. She moved away but visited regularly, bringing her own children to spend summers on the ranch where she had grown up. Tommy joined the Army and saw service in various frontier posts before settling down in New Mexico with a mail-order bride of his own. "Now, I understand why you and Pa worked out so well," he wrote to Rose. "When you choose each other deliberately, with eyes wide open about what you are getting into, it creates a strong foundation. Mary and I are building something real here, just like you and Pa did." Rose cried when she read Tommy's letter, touched that her son understood what she and Yates had built together. Their marriage had started as a practical arrangement, a solution to two people's problems. But it had become something far more precious, a true partnership built on love, respect, and shared purpose. As Yates and Rose entered their 50s, they began to slow down somewhat, though neither would admit to getting old. Yates still worked the ranch every day, though he left the hardest physical labor to James and the hired hands. Rose still maintained the household and her medical practice, though she had trained several younger women to assist her. They spent more time together now, sitting on the porch in the evenings just like they had when they were newlyweds. But now they watched their grandchildren play in the yard, listened to the sounds of the thriving ranch around them, and reflected on all they had built together. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had stayed in Boston?" Yates asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the desert gold and crimson. Rose considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I imagine I would have eventually been forced to marry the boarding house owner's son, or someone like him. I would have been trapped in a life I did not choose with a man who did not respect me. I probably would have had children, but I would not have been happy. No, I do not regret leaving for a single moment. Coming here was the best decision I ever made." "It was the best day of my life when you stepped off that stagecoach," Yates said. "I knew I was lonely out here, but I did not realize how lonely until I had someone to share it with." "You made everything better, Rose. You still do." Rose leaned against his shoulder, content in the warmth of his love and the beauty of the desert evening. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other across the miles and the years, who had built something lasting and true. More years passed, and Rose and Yates celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, friends, and neighbors. The celebration was held at the ranch, with tables set up under the cottonwood trees and food enough to feed half the county. People gave speeches praising the Dalton family and the contributions they had made to the community. James stood up to offer a toast. "My parents' marriage has been an example to all of us," he said, raising his glass. "They showed us what it means to build a partnership based on respect and love." They took a chance on each other, two strangers who met through the mail, and they created something beautiful. To Ma and Pa, the best parents anyone could ask for. Everyone cheered and drank, and Rose felt tears streaming down her face. She looked around at all the people who had gathered to celebrate with them, at the thriving ranch that had started as a rough homestead in the desert, at the family they had created from nothing but hope and determination. "We did good," Yates whispered in her ear, his arm around her shoulders. "We did better than good," Rose corrected. "We did amazing." As the sun set on their 25th anniversary celebration, Rose reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had arrived in Arizona with nothing but hope, a young woman fleeing an intolerable situation and taking a desperate chance on a stranger. Yates had looked at her empty hands and said that hope was all they needed to start, and he had been right. From that hope, they had built a marriage, a family, a home, a legacy. They had faced challenges and overcome them together. They had celebrated joys and weathered sorrows. They had loved each other through every season of life, growing closer with each passing year. Now, surrounded by the evidence of their life together, Rose knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice all those years ago. She had taken a leap of faith into the unknown, and she had found everything her heart had been searching for. The ranch would continue after they were gone, passed down to James and eventually to his children. The house would be filled with new generations of Daltons, each adding their own chapter to the family story. But it had all started with a frightened mail-order bride and a lonely cowboy who dared to believe that hope was enough to build a life on. As the stars came out over the desert and the guests began to drift home, Rose and Yates sat together on their porch one more time. They held hands in the darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. "I love you," Rose said softly. "Today, tomorrow, and forever. Thank you for taking a chance on me." "I love you too," Yates replied. "You were always worth the chance. You were always worth everything." They sat together under the stars, grateful for the life they had built and the love they shared. And if you had asked either of them whether a mail-order marriage could work, whether two strangers could build a real and lasting love, they would have smiled and said yes. "All you need is hope," they would have told you. Hope and the courage to take the first step. That is all they had needed to start, and look what they had built. A marriage that had weathered every storm. A family that would carry on their legacy. A love that had only grown stronger with time. It was more than either of them had dreamed possible that day when Rose stepped off the stagecoach with nothing but a carpetbag and hope in her heart. But then, the best things in life often are.